It's 10 o'clock sharp. We have more folks who are joining us today. And unfortunately, we could not get, or I could not get the Facebook live stream going. For some reason, it's just having some connectivity issues. So if you're joining us here on Zoom, that's perfect. You're able to see the whole thing. We'll record it, and we're going to also post it on our YouTube to watch later. I really believe that today's presentation is going to be really impactful and insightful, and I really encourage you to ask questions throughout in the chat box. We'll address those after the panel has had its discussion, but we are going to have some time for Q&A. So if you don't know already, you're here with Viante, New Mexico. My name is Rhiannon Samuel, and I am the Executive Director of Viante. And what Viante is a nonpartisan nonprofit that aims to provide transparency and accountability around our state elected officials' behavior, highlighting people who are working together to address our education, crime, and quality of life issues, which is why what we're talking about today, which is education in New Mexico in the time of COVID, is so relevant because as we're trying to remove New Mexico off the wrong end of many national lists, these folks that I'm going to introduce are really in the front lines working on that, whether they be parents who are working to educate their kids, teachers who are the ones who are taking a lot of the brunt force of educating those kids what it means to put policy into action, and then in policy too, what kind of things can we put in place to improve education in New Mexico? So that's what we're talking about, education in New Mexico during the time of COVID-19. As many of you know, school was canceled for the rest of the year following spring break in an abundance of caution to make sure that children were staying home and healthy, and we were practicing social distancing. But that has left many teachers, parents, and policymakers left to kind of pick up the pieces and figure out, how do we educate in this unique setting? What does it mean to have kids meaningfully engage? And these folks that we have with us today are really going to help us understand that. And I know I have a lot of questions on what it means. Are our kids going to be on grade level? Lots of things. So without further ado, I have some introductions. First, I have Amanda Aragon. She comes from advocacy, working in both the private and public sectors. She attended the University of Tulsa, where she obtained a degree in international business in Spanish, becoming the first person in her family to graduate college. After college, Amanda worked in the energy sector and eventually as Director of Stakeholder Relations for New Mexico at ConocoPhillips, where she managed the company's philanthropic investments and sponsorships, as well as developed relationships with business and community leaders across the state. In 2015, Amanda was named New Mexico's top business professional under 30 by Albuquerque Business First. After 6 successful years in the energy sector, Amanda pursued public service as the Director of Strategic Outreach at the New Mexico Public Education Department. Her experience working for New Mexico's Public Education Department affirmed her passion for education and motivated her to work to engage more stakeholders in working to improve New Mexico's education system, which has led to the development and creation of New Mexico Kids Can. So Amanda, I'm going to unmute and share to start your video. Welcome to the conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite, Rhiannon. We're so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Next wonderful human being I have to introduce is a good friend of mine, Jenna Hagen-Gruber. Jenna is a English teacher at Sandia. Sorry, I have a lot of light, so it's hard for me to see. At Sandia High School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She also taught for a year in Bosnia, and she has spent the last 2 summers teaching in Poland. She is a New Mexico native and went to the University of New Mexico, where she received her undergraduate degree in English and philosophy and a master's degree in secondary education. She will start her doctorate in education this summer at Vanderbilt University. Jenna comes from a family of educators and aspires to be the Secretary of Education for New Mexico. She believes that to write good policy, you must be in the classroom with students and understand what the day-to-day experiences of education are truly like. She loves her students and believes that being an educator is the best job around. Jenna first finished serving as the president of UNM Young and she just finished, I'm sorry. And she runs the Albuquerque Involved Motivators program on the board of Albuquerque Involved, a nonprofit in the Albuquerque community. What Jenna has failed to put in her bio, but she recently was awarded Albuquerque's 40 Under 40 by Albuquerque Business First as well. With that, I would love to introduce Jenna. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here to talk about education today.
Definitely. Our final panelist is Tammy Thomas. Tammy has 2 careers. She is a CEO at the Thomas Family Household and is the online marketing manager for TLC Plumbing and Utility in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and studied at the University of New Mexico before transferring to the Southwest University of Visual Arts, where she received her bachelor's degree in arts with an emphasis on graphic design. Tammy started her marketing and design career at Loveless Scientific Resources, where she worked to advertise clinical trials in New Mexico and several other states. After leaving Loveless Scientific Resources, Tammy joined TLC in 2008. After having 2 sons, she shifted her focus to TLC's online marketing and currently manages the company's websites, online advertising, and digital marketing efforts. Tammy loves balancing her busy career with raising her 2 boys and her husband, Ben. Currently, she's focused on her involvement in her kids' school and extracurricular activities, including Little League and many other sports. Welcome, Tammy. And start video. Hey, Tammy.
Hi, good morning. I'm excited to join you all today.
I am going to stop this share. So now everyone should just be seeing us. But I am so grateful to have each of you join us. I know you all are so busy during this time of social distancing, and it's no easy feat to join an hour-long Zoom call. So thanks. And to all our attendees, thank you for joining this important conversation. Again, please put questions in the chat box. We will look at those after we get through our little discussion. So my first question for the group, and anybody can take it who wants to take it first, is how has COVID impacted education for the better and or worse for New Mexico's students?
I'll start if that's okay. So I actually sent that question to the whole English department at Sandia to try and get like a vibe on all of the teachers and how they were feeling. And one of the things that we noticed was that we think more teachers are, or more students are more excited about school. Like the students are going to be excited about coming back in the future. We have a lot of students that are reaching out saying like, I want more work. I don't have anything to do. I'm really lonely. And I have also gotten a lot of responses from parents who are, you know, sad that their students can't come to school, or sad that the students aren't being forced to do work if they're already passing. So I think it'll give a better respect for school from both the parents and the teachers, and as well as the students. They all want to be in school right now. And that's the benefit of it. Although there are a lot of negatives as well, right? We don't get to do face-to-face. Even when we are on Zoom calls with our students, many of them don't live in environments where they want their camera to be on or their microphone to be on. So they're on, but you don't know how much they're retaining. We don't know who has a Chromebook, if all of the students have access. A lot of the students can't come on when it's the set time for class because their siblings are in school as well. So I think it's challenging to make sure that it's equitable. And I think that that's been the biggest challenge, is that we don't know how to make sure that all of our students have access and equity right now.
Yeah, I think that's for sure like the biggest downside to this. And there are plenty of downsides, but we know in New Mexico we've had huge gaps in student achievement between students that are more affluent, students who are Caucasian, and our students of color, our students living in poverty. 71% of students in New Mexico receive free and reduced price lunch. That's one of the highest rates in the country. So figuring out how those students have equitable access to education at this time is challenging. And I don't think it's happening across most districts. I don't think it's happening across most schools, which to some extent is understandable because it's a huge change very quickly. But those gaps are widening and will continue to widen the longer that students aren't in their school buildings.
I agree with you completely, Amanda. And from a parent's perspective, it's, you know, my husband and I have always valued education and the school environment for learning and for social development, and our kids aren't getting that right now. And for us, home is not school. You know, our kids have always come home and just played and wanted to be at home and relax, and having to transition that into being like, no, this is school time. This is not the same as you don't just get to play and we need to get this done. I think that's a huge negative impact, you know, but we've had to frequently be like, this is time for this is time for this. And I feel like my kids are in elementary school level and they didn't have the skills going into this to work independently. And I think that, you know, that is a positive now, is that they are learning those skills, but I think that's a huge challenge and requirement for parents.
Great, thank you.
I think those are, oh, sorry, Rhiannon. I was just going to say some of the benefits are it's forcing us to address what we refer to as the digital divide. Who doesn't have access to a learning device? Who doesn't have access to high-speed internet? In ways that we knew those things existed before, but we weren't doing anything to address them. So that's a benefit, is we're seeing some movement to address those gaps. And I think it's forcing better conversations between schools and parents. We often hear a lot from our school systems that we want more parent engagement, but we also hear from parents that those conversations are not always, they don't always feel reciprocal. And so this is an opportunity, I think, to reestablish true partnership between parents and teachers to say, how do we best meet the needs of your student during this time, and create some tactical plans to make sure those gaps don't grow.
And I also think it's helpful for teachers because a lot of teachers might not have been pushed to use technology in this capacity before. So it's, you know, all the teachers now, whether or not you want to, you have to learn how to use Google Classroom, you have to learn how to use Google Meet. We're being forced to communicate with our students in a way that they actually want to be talked to, like through Remind messages, which is like a texting app almost, and things like that. So I think it's forcing all of us to grow out of our comfort zone. And although I think that there are still a lot of downfalls, I would say that from the teachers that I know and from myself, like, we're growing through this process.
You guys bring up an interesting question for me, which is how important is parent engagement during this time of learning from home?
Just from a parent standpoint, it's vital. I mean, it's a challenge working. My husband and I are both working full-time from home, and it's difficult to, you know, to make sure the kids are on task and all that. And I definitely see some gaps. And I think from a parent's perspective, we're going to have to really sit down and talk to our teachers as these weeks wind down and ask them what we can do to make sure our kids are prepared for the next grade level. And I think at our school, we see a lot of parent involvement, but I definitely see, and sympathize with parents who are working outside of their home and not sure how much their kids are getting done. And it falls a lot on us, way more than ever before. And it's a challenge.
And that's always been a challenge. I think when we have conversations at the state level about where the responsibility of education lies, we can really get caught in these frames that people have about whose responsibility it is. The fact of the matter is, like, our students in New Mexico don't have the same home lives. Like, we know that our students have higher occurrences of ACE experiences when they're children. We know that 71% of them come from poverty. Like, those are just realities. So if we're waiting for the day where we say suddenly every parent is a great parent. Suddenly every parent has the ability to be at home with their kid, provide intervention, get private tutoring. Like that day for New Mexico is not coming. So we have to figure out how we can systemically address the needs of our students, even if it means that they don't have access to a parent at home who can say, hey, it's time for your Zoom meeting with your teacher. Hey, let me help you with your math homework. Like, that's just not a reality for some of our kids. And the quicker that we recognize that and work to address that, instead of saying, well, if parents aren't involved, then there's just nothing we can do, the quicker I think we can get the system making better progress than we've seen, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, so how, and this again is for the entire group, how will we know that children will be on grade level when the fall semester starts? Do we believe, will they be? So to extend that, will they or won't they be, and why do you think that?
I don't think we can know that right now. I think it depends on the level of engagement a teacher is getting. I saw that Marcia Campbell in the chat wrote that she's been doing weekly Zoom meetings, but only getting a third of her participants. And my mom teaches 5th grade, and some days she gets 17 of the 22, and some days she gets 6. I teach 9th grade. Yesterday I had 6 of the 30 come for 6th period, but I had 28 of the 30 come for my honors 3rd period class. So I think like there's only so much that the students can do. I think it goes back to the parent involvement. Like if we can't control what their home life looks like, and that's challenging because we don't have the control of them being in the classroom right now. So we can only teach them as much as they have access to right now. And then if the students aren't coming, half the class might be below grade level when they come back next semester, while the other half would be where they're supposed to be. So I think we can hope that we're doing our best as educators to provide the resources, but we don't have control over whether or not those resources are utilized, especially with the situation this semester. So I think it's a game of maybe they'll be on grade level. And I think every teacher that I've talked to is aware that next semester we will have to start, going over and reviewing things from February of this year, because there will be 6 months of time that we were not in a classroom setting by the time that we go back in August.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Rhiannon, it's really important to center ourselves on like what we know to be true even before this. So we know that before COVID, only 7 out of 10 kids in New Mexico was not on grade level in reading, and 8 out of 10 kids weren't on grade level in math. And that was before they weren't in school for 6 months. So we were starting every school year with most kids behind grade level as it was. The question is, how much further behind grade level will they be in August? We've certainly been advocating with the department to use some of their funding. Can you still hear me? I think my microphone is being funny. Okay. Use some of their funding to do some screening assessments as early as possible into the school year to identify where students are coming in, to say like, okay, they got some of that content from the last year, they didn't, they're further behind than we thought. We actually rolled out a new policy goal earlier this week where we want every parent to have a conference from their school district or school before the beginning of the year saying, here's what we knew about your kid before this happened. The last year of assessment results told us that they were already behind, they were on track, they were ahead. Our interim assessment results that we got through this year tell us that they were making good progress. So between us, between the parent and the school, this is what we think could work best for your child come August. The parent might want to say like, hey, I want my kid to redo that grade. They were already so far behind. They missed half of 2nd grade. Let's talk about what that would look like. Or they might want to say, hey, let's move them on to 3rd grade, but what kind of interventions can we implement at home and at school to make sure that that kid works? Those plans can't happen if parents don't know that information. And we see that all the time. Sometimes parents don't get that information for a variety of reasons. So making sure that we're having those conversations this summer about what we did know about that student before schools closed, and then getting a really high quality screening assessment in place as soon as possible when kids enter, hopefully, return to school in August.
I agree, Amanda. I feel like it's been communicated to us at our school that we anticipate that we will not be at grade level. And that based on communication we received from our principal, it was do not stress, do as much as you can. And when you work, again, I think because most people can relate, when both parents are working in and out of the home during this time, I'm not a teacher. I'm trying to reinforce what the assignments that are given, but I feel like it's more at an elementary school level, it's more reinforcing what they've already learned. They're not learning new concepts, and I'm not equipped to teach that given working 40 plus hours a week. So I'm just trying to do the best we can and give worksheets and do the worksheets that they can, but they're not learning anything new. And I don't know, I mean, I think there's varying degrees of levels of what parents can handle in their home at this time. So I think most parents would feel comfortable, would not know going into this that next year there's going to be a lot of things to review to bring kids up to speed, and that may be at varying levels. We had just had parent-teacher conferences the week that school shut down. So we had just been given notice, and our younger son did need to work on his reading to bring it up to grade level for second grade. So I worry, as a parent, I worry about how to prepare him for that going into the fall. And so I think parents are aware of that and trying not to stress about that along with everything else that's going on.
I think a small benefit of this, though, is that although we're not teaching new material, we're able to spend 6 extra weeks going over the material that might have been challenging for the students in the first place. And I know that a lot of teachers, we're aware that the students are going to come in struggling next year. We know that. We're prepared. We're even starting to prepare, what if we had to stay online for another 3 months? What would that look like? What can we do now to start training for more online things, learning how to use more resources? But it has been, I've definitely seen students who have been struggling with, the 11-sentence paragraph for the whole school year. And now hey, I'm not allowed to teach you new material for 11 weeks or 6 weeks. We're gonna write the 11-sentence paragraph multiple times over the 6-week period. And I have seen growth in students that were behind. So although I don't think all the students will be where they need to be come August, I think we are helping students practice the areas where they were struggling, and hopefully that will level the playing field a little bit when we do come time for the next school year. So I do think that there are small silver linings here, more one-on-one time with the students that need it, or being able to just go back and review when we wouldn't be if we were teaching new material every day.
I think Rhiannon, being that Viante focuses on policy and you know how important nuance and how complicated these things get, one of the things that New Mexico has been doing for the last few years is pushing back the assessment window. What we were hearing from parents and teachers and everyone was the assessment window is too long, and it's too disruptive. So, and it starts too soon in the school year, too early in the school year. So we need more time to actually do content before we assess at the end of the year. So most states actually, they're not missing new content because they were already starting their spring assessments. But in New Mexico, we have pushed our spring assessment back as far into the school year as possible. So we weren't going to start until later April. So our kids were missing opportunities to learn new content, whereas in some states, they were oh, we already taught the full year of content because we were going to start assessing at the end of March. And so what was a benefit, let's push assessment back as far as possible, in this instance has an unintended consequence of some kids in other states got a full year of content smashed in, which is not great practice, but at least they were exposed to it all. Whereas our New Mexico students may not have been exposed to all of the standards for that grade level because they still had another month before assessment started.
Amanda, this is a great segue into policy and how our public education department and different school districts are adapting. And so I want to know, what have you seen across the state that has worked well, perhaps not as well? And how receptive are our policymakers to ideas coming from the community?
Yeah, so when I think of policymakers, I think of them in kind of two groups, like, you know, executive, so everyone at the public education department, and then our lawmakers. And right now, to be candid, our lawmakers are thinking about budget and budget alone. It's just such a crisis for us, and it is a crisis for education for sure, that we haven't seen a ton of good conversation around what this means for education because they're so focused on special session and right-sizing the budget. From the executive side, from the public education department side, you know, I think they did a great job. Unlike a lot of states, every district did have to complete a continuous learning plan. We did a little bit of an audit of those continuous learning plans, and as expected, some are really great and some are not great. So in those sorts of conversations, it becomes, you know, how does the public education department kind of work to make sure that every kid has access to what they need to be successful? And how do you balance that with the desires of the local school board, which is an elected board by the community, and who really has final say? I think personally, I'd like to see the department leaning in a little bit more and saying, here are some more guardrails about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, what kids need and what kids don't need. But on the other hand, like, you can't usurp that power from the local authority. So the things that we're seeing working are really, and Jenna hit on it earlier, some schools are planning ahead. Some schools planned ahead before this started, when we saw it rolling out in other states, in other school districts across the country. And instead of waiting for PED to say, hey guys, school's out, you need to create a plan, they were already working on a plan, so that when school was canceled for the rest of the year, they knew what they were doing. They had already talked to their staff about it, and they were ready to go. Instead of saying, oh no, some districts didn't start distance learning until a month after we announced schools were closed. That's crazy. That means for a month, kids were just doing, like, you know, if their teachers were reaching out, great, but there was no comprehensive plan about how that district was going to meet the needs of students for a month. Like that, that's crazy. So those sorts of things, I think, are where we would like to see the executive weigh in a little bit more heavily and say, hey, our kids like need something. So how are we going to move that forward? And I think in the conversation that we just had, we need to be really, we need to see strong leadership from PED about what the plans to address these gaps over the summer are. We've done such a great job as a state of saying, let's invest in things like extended learning time programs across our schools. Let's invest in things like K-5+ for the students and communities that need them. We can transition those programs to online. They're not going to be as good as they would have been if we had kids doing K-5+ in person, but it's better than nothing. The funding is there. So, but if we're going to do that, if we're going to set up summer learning programs, like, it needs to be announced in the next week or two if it's going to be effective. And that's where we're really hoping we see some movement from the executive and PED and leading in that sort of way.
Jenna, as somebody who aspires to get into public policy, but also somebody who has to implement a lot of these things that are happening, what do you see as working, and where would you like to see us going?
I think the PED and the executive team has been really graceful in their transition, actually. And a lot of the teachers, I think, agree with that. We've been told to give a lot of grace to our students. I think Alex Herring had wrote about the main reason New Mexico PED is instructing districts not to teach new content is because we don't have full access and equity across the board. And I think that that's true. I think students and some parents, I believe most are on board, but I think that there are some students and parents that are frustrated that we're not able to do the same rigor that we would be giving in a classroom. But across the board, I think most people are aware, you know, we're doing the best that we can with what we've had. We had a couple weeks to prep and put our entire classroom online. There's not a whole lot that we can do to make it A+ material right now. But we're trying to still care for the students in the same way that we would. One of the teachers said that a student, their biggest gripe about not being in the school right now is that every day that they came to class, they got to hug their teacher, and now they don't get that reassurance. So I don't know if there's a lot that we can do about the social emotional aspects of this. And I think that that's the challenge right now, is how can we still give that same care to our students when we're on a computer screen. But overall, I think admin has done a great job. I think the PED has done a good job being aware of, here are the challenges in New Mexico. Amanda hit on it earlier. And I think Tammy did too, about not all the parents are going to be able to give their students the same encouragement that another parent might. And we just have to be aware of that, and we have to do the best that we can with where we are right now. And I think if we did stay online for longer term, hopefully we would be able to do more by that time, because we're aware of the flaws now. But overall, I think we're all pretty content with what we have, because we know that we're doing the best we can.
You bring up a point that I have heard often in either podcasts or different articles from local leaders around students having to deal with these social and emotional experiences where they are traumatized that they're not able to be around their friends, they're not experiencing graduation, or in some cases, kids have lost family members to this global pandemic. So my question for the group is, how is the education system going to respond to that when kids get back in the classroom, if at all?
I think we can mitigate a little bit of it right now just by creating routine where possible and making it as flexible as possible. So early on, we saw some districts or schools say, okay, we're not going to do any online Zoom sessions because of technology or whatever it might be. And then we saw students and parents say, but like, my kids actually want to see their friends. They miss seeing their peers. They miss seeing their teacher. And so one of the things that we recommend doing now is like offer it as an opportunity. But if a kid can't get on at that time, make it available for them later so they can watch it back. And so that's both meeting the needs of students and being flexible to the needs of families to say, hey, we're going to do this because we want you to engage with your peers. It's really important. And no, it's not the same on a computer, but it does make students feel like, oh, look, I do have these people that love me. I do have these people that care about me. They're both my friends and my educators, and just seeing their face is a big help. And then I do think that our districts need to be really thoughtful about how they deploy resources in the fall, whether it's more social workers or guidance counselors doing more daily check-ins every day. It can be as simple as when students, especially young kids, when they walk into a classroom, you know, they have their little like stick and they put it in the pocket of the emoji that they're feeling that day. I'm feeling a little tired, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad. And the teachers just have that way of knowing like, oh, I need to give extra attention to John today because he's a little off. But you know, these students are indicating that they're really fulfilled today. So things like that, just daily classroom practices that aren't crazy, they don't cost a ton of money, they don't require a ton of professional development. Those things are good if you can do them, but there are small things that we can do even if we don't have a ton of extra money in the budget to focus on social emotional supports.
I know as a parent, that's been my priority over education. Like, and maybe it's the communication we received from our school was that don't worry about where your kids are, just do your best. And that's when really our priority is making sure the kids are okay, you know, because it's hard. We're in stressful environments, and thankfully my husband and I are both blessed that we still are working, and so they're not feeling that stress. But families that are facing that, that's a huge stress to them, and those kids feel that, and they know something's going on. We can't go out and do the same things we did. I can't go out and hug my friends. I can't go out and see my friends. And that's been our priority as parents, is just making sure our kids are feeling that same way and trying to bring as much joy to that. And then the schoolwork is routine. It's something to do during the day and all of that. So it is a priority for me, their education, but also their social well-being and their emotional well-being is more important right now.
I think a lot of teachers are changing their assignments to address social and emotional well-being. Actually, in the English department at Sandia, we are doing, one of the teachers had created this COVID journaling assignment. So every week the students are journaling about their experiences each day, things that are positive, what food they're eating, what was exciting about the day, what's different, who do you miss at school. And I think for students that I have that have never been engaged in class, they're writing these journals because they want to talk to me about that they're upset or that something's going on. So I have students telling me how much they hate doing yard work. And they're like, my parents make me do yard work every day and I hate it. And then I also have students that are telling me more about, you know, their parent lost their job, their parent had a heart attack and is in the hospital, and it's a lot of stress on their family. And so I think across the board, I think teachers are trying to change their assignments to address those issues, because we recognize too, I don't care if my student understands Romeo and Juliet by the end of this 6 weeks. That's not the point. The point is that they're still reading, they're still writing, and they're still being cared for. My mom is an elementary school teacher and she has office hours every day. And she has 6 or 7 kids that just come on to office hours to eat lunch with her because they're lonely and they miss having that interaction. But I think that as educators, parents, policy writers, that's what we can do, is say, how can we also ensure that the students are engaged but being cared for? And I think a lot of educators are doing it pretty well, from what I'm seeing, and the educators that I really value, they're doing a great job.
My final question before we start jumping into the questions that we've been getting in the chat is something that Tammy and I had a discussion about yesterday on the phone around this access to technology. It's something that's been hit on earlier in our conversation, but how can we make that more equitable? And more than just access, there's a digital divide with parents and kids from different grade levels who may not know how to upload a certain type of document. So can we talk about that and what kind of steps, tangible steps, we can take moving forward to address both issues, both the access and that digital divide?
The first step we can take is actually super easy, in my opinion. Part of the CARES Act funding that came out included 2 buckets of funds that really focus on education from pre-K to K-12. And one is the governor got a bucket of funds that she can use for education funding. It's $22 million. The public education department got $108 million to use for this. They can hold 10% of that aside for an initiative of their own. The rest of it gets deployed directly to districts. So districts could use that money immediately to buy technology. But we're recommending that the public education department actually hold back that 10%. So that would be $10 million. Pair it with the governor's $22 million and you'd have close to $32 million. It is almost enough money to get every low-income student a device of their own to learn on. And that doesn't take care of the internet issue. It doesn't take care of the disconnect between parent and teacher and student, but it does reduce one of the biggest barriers that we hear every day, which is not every student has access to a learning device. So get every student access. We could do that in the next 3 months easily. And then we can actually implement the systems that we need to. We can use other stimulus funds to work on broadband, and I've seen lots of articles about that happening already. And then we can implement things for students to kind of bridge that digital divide on their own, or help parents bridge it for themselves.
I know that one of the reasons I brought this up to Rhiannon was, I consider myself very tech savvy, but having elementary school level kids trying to do some independent work is a challenge. So there is, and I don't know across the board, across the state, across the district, how much emphasis had been on technology prior to this happening. I know as part of the PTA for our school, we were paying for technology program that was not provided by APS. So our kids from kindergarten were getting exposure to devices and learning how to navigate elements online and using technology in that way. And I still feel like now during this, I've got to stop what I'm doing for my work and help my child do his assignment online and type it up or get in there. And I definitely can see a real gap in elementary level where they need more assistance with technology. And if we do go into this for the next school year, how teachers can adapt to that so it's really easy for kids to upload and complete assignments rather than relying on their parents, especially if they're out of the home, to help them with those assignments.
Tammy, I think that's such a great point, because if it was a practice in the school already, then that transition is so much easier for the student. So if you're in a district like Farmington that already had one-to-one device for all middle and high schoolers, you're used to it. You know to get your computer out and to use your digital textbook. But if you didn't have access to technology outside of the one computer lab offered in your elementary school, then that's way harder for you to transition. And so those disconnects that we saw when school was quote unquote normal are now manifesting even greater divides as we transition to online learning, because there are some elementary school students who are used to, oh, this is my independent learning time on my math intervention online. I know to go get my laptop and how to access ST Math. But if they've never had that experience, they've never developed the skills to do that sort of independent learning. And teaching that remotely, how to build that independent skill, is a challenge that I'm not sure we know how to tackle in the next 6 months.
I also think we have a big population of educators that haven't been given like access to technology in their classroom. I went through Donors Choose to buy 10 computers for my classroom, which it only covers, you know, a third of the students. But for the students that don't have phones, they can go and get a computer and take the online quizzes or use Google Classroom. But, you know, our district doesn't have enough money to give one-to-one Chromebooks yet. So teachers haven't been given the ability to use technology consistently in their classrooms, which has made the transition to Google Classroom Online, which is what we're using right now, a little bit hard for maybe those teachers that didn't have it to begin with. So I think if we are going to urge students and teachers to be more tech savvy, and if this continues on through the fall, which hopefully it doesn't, but if it did, I do think we would need to have all the teachers trained as well on what resources do you have available, and expect that your students are all going to have a Chromebook, because we can't teach equitably until every student is given technology of their own and know how to use it, which is exactly what Amanda and Tammy were just talking about. So I think we all kind of feel the same about that. And I don't know if there's a 100% solution right now, but I think we're getting closer.
To that point with Jenna's classroom, I was giving a presentation there a few months ago, and yes, you had technology, but the technology given to you by the district was outdated and slow, and it made it so much more frustrating to teach because you had to grapple with the delay in time and the loading. And I was astounded to see that, because you had told me, I think it was a Promethean board, right? And it was older, it barely worked, and that's frustrating that even before this, the technology teachers were given just wasn't up to par.
Well, you know, the technology that the teachers are given, not for their classroom, but for themselves, doesn't work most of the time. It's old, and it's nobody's fault. I mean, we just don't have funding for it. But I bring my own personal computer every day to school, because if my computer shuts down, I can still teach. And I think a lot of teachers are in that same boat. My mom is using a computer that was given to her, and it's like a 2010 Mac, and it shuts down on her all the time. But like, we learn how to use it. I do think educators would be more willing to teach online if we had technology that worked all the time, because it's not reliable. And so it's like, okay, I have a book that I know will be here and I can teach out of the book, but my Promethean board might shut down and my computer might freeze and break because it's 12 years old. so I'm going to just teach out of the book. So thankfully, I appreciate that APS reached out to all the teachers. Our principals reached out to us and said, hey, are any teachers struggling with getting technology during this time period? And they gave the teachers technology to use at home during COVID. But I do think that needs to be something that we address soon. Do teachers have technology to teach, and do students have technology to learn? Even if COVID doesn't exist, like that needs to be in the classroom.
Oh yeah, this has adjusted meeting for forever. We're gonna have to constantly to adapt to this and realize what works and what doesn't work. With that, one of the questions we had gotten early on from a participant was about bridges and the need to have families and educators be connected. And there was a few ideas tossed out here on what those bridges look like. I want to start with Tammy. What would benefit you as a parent educating from home to make that communication easier?
I feel like we could definitely get some additional contact with the teachers, you know, and maybe being available later in the afternoon or early. I don't know. Those are just ideas thrown out in because it's hard. Like I just put on the Zoom or the Google Meet in the morning and I'm like, get started, tell me what the kids are learning independently to make their own list. And then they come to us with, this is what I have to do today. But I definitely could see, I think Amanda mentioned it, some time before the school year starts to say, this is where we feel your kid is at based on the assessment. And I feel like we can get them to this point, or this is what you're going to need to be doing. I'm lucky in that our school has a lot of parent involvement, but I feel like it's going to really need to be stepped up through this and to continue, as even if we continue into the first the school year like this, as is they're starting to interrupt my meeting right now.
Which there was another question that came up. That's
Sorry.
fine, bring them in. We're working women, we know. There was another question, Tammy, that how is your balance with work and having your kids being educated at home? How is yours and Ben, your husband's employer, adapting to that?
I'm very lucky that TLC has always been very supportive of my family and allowing me even before COVID to work from home as I needed to. And so I was used to making that adjustment and working from home, not 100%, but part-time. And they've been very supportive, and I can adapt my schedule to stop what I'm doing unless it's a meeting and help the kids with something, and I'll keep my computer on until 8 o'clock at night or pop in and out later in the day as it ends. And Ben and I definitely tag team. He runs a business, so it's more challenging for him. So some days we get started and we're like, okay, what meeting do you have? What meeting do you have? This is when I'm available to keep the kids, to watch them and make sure they're doing their work. This is when I'm not. So we tag team a lot of it, and I don't think I could do it if he wasn't working home as well. Even though he has a busy career, he and I can modify our schedules to make it happen.
Thank you for that. Another question we got, I think was so astute, is the fact that we've been grappling over the past few years, if not a decade, with kids having screen time and having kids play video games all the time or be on their phone, but now asking them to learn on a screen. Is this a concern? If so, how can we address it? What does the group think?
I saw Alex had asked a question about, like, you know, students are on their video games. I have students that are playing video games while I'm teaching online. And I think, like, they've told me, they're like, sorry, miss, I just had to kill somebody on this game. Like, come on, let's focus. But I think, like, teachers have learned how to manage that in a classroom. We try and say, like, phones are away when we're doing X, Y, and Z, but then phones are out when we're doing these things online. Online teaching is a totally different challenge, and I know Alex is a teacher, so he's experiencing those things. And I don't know if there is a perfect solution right now, because we also have to take into we have to take into consideration the cultural norms of a lot of these students' lives. Like, we don't know if they live in a house with 18 people and like all their aunts and uncles and all their cousins. We don't know if they live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 siblings. We don't know if they can turn on their camera and feel comfortable with us seeing their households, or if they can talk on the computer. And then on the other end of it, we don't know if they're just keeping their camera off so that they can play video games, and they're so, you know, blown out of the water by how much technology there is that they're just like, I don't want to do the assignment. So I think a big factor in that is whether or not we can give them credit for their assignments, right? We need to be able to, and if this did continue into the fall, we would need to be able to say, like, you are getting credit right now for every day that you're here. You're getting credit for your assignments. We're allowed to grade you. And then we as educators need to say, even though we're putting things online, can we have them do things like, here's your assignment, the directions are online, but you do the assignment on a blank piece of paper, or you do it, you print it out, and you're able to do it still by hand. You draw this assignment and you don't use GIF art on the computer to make it. You actually have to physically draw it and color it. Taking into consideration that we don't know what materials and supplies those students have, but assuming that every teacher would scaffold or differentiate depending on the need of their student. But I think it goes both towards the teacher and the student. What are their needs? How can we help them be online? How can we help them get credit for the assignments and make them feel that they have to be on instead of playing video games, but also giving them the ability to do things by paper and pencil, because a lot of students need that physical touch and physical interaction to succeed. They don't do well reading online. They need to be able to print out the PDF and like highlight it on their own. And that's the type of learner I am too. So I'm trying to see if we can find a way to do that in the fall if this continued.
I think one thing that we saw that was really creative to the point that Jenna made was we're seeing, you know, out of a response to like the inequities that exist across our students, like this hesitancy to make things required. But then you hear from parents like, hey, if there's nothing in it for my kid, I'm having a really hard time like making them do it because they know it doesn't really matter if they do it. So finding that balance, and I just want to shout out Cottonwood Classical Charter School here. I think the way that they put their continuous learning plan together was the most creative around this. So they extended their 3rd quarter and made it so that all of the work that the students did in the 3rd quarter, which was right in the middle of the transition to COVID, they extended that quarter and then made it so that grades couldn't be hurt, they could only be helped for the remainder of that 3rd quarter. And then when they got to 4th quarter, which is effectively all of May, they said, okay, but when we get to May, we're back on our normal like grading schedule. And of course, like teachers are taking into that into account when they're creating their assignments, but assignments start counting for credit again at May. So they allowed a time for transition. They allowed a time of resetting those expectations without it penalizing the students. But then they said, okay, but now you guys know what our expectation is. We've now called every parent one-on-one, so we know what to expect from that student, and we can start assessing those students on their daily work.
And I think that as soon as if we were able to go one-to-one with every student having access to technology, that would be a great plan to implement, because then we could require to some extent, right? We might not have 100% participation, but require participation in some capacity. But again, it's not feasible right now with the fact that we don't have every student with technology. We don't know who doesn't have technology, and we can't give that access with the way that things are right now.
Well, and even speaking to technology, I mean, we have a laptop for the kids that we had purchased way before COVID had happened, but you can see this old printer behind me. I hadn't hardly used it. And having to print worksheets and stuff every day. And I could see where families who don't have that, I think some schools in our district are providing that with meal pickup printed worksheets and stuff. And I think that's valuable for our kids to not just spend all their time on screen time or in a, sitting in a classroom. And I have to keep reminding my kids, please make sure you're paying attention and participating in class, but also having work assignments done that are printed and offline, I think are valuable. But I think that's also another gap that many parents may face, and if they don't have anywhere to print the content or put it back up on to turn it back in.
I have a really interesting question from Candace that had never even crossed my mind, but I think it's so astute. She said that she worries that there will be an undue burden on women, specifically with homeschooling, especially as they go into the next year, possibly via like remote learning. So with parents having to make choices who stays at home, she's concerned that women will face an undue burden to give up or pause their career to make sure their kids are engaged. So I know we have one parent here, but we're all strong women. So, I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can definitely go first. I can definitely see that as a challenge, you know, as things, for the first couple of weeks, I was home alone with the kids when schools closed and my husband's company hadn't shut down. And it was challenging to get schoolwork done. And I don't know if I could do it on my own if I was trying to manage my career still and keep the kids engaged in school if he wasn't here to help me tag team it. But I feel like, yeah, I could see that falling in our case, in our instance, in our family, given, you know, our financial situation, in that might fall on me in that case to become more of the educator.
I worry a lot about single parent households as well. I think that there are a lot of those in New Mexico and a lot of parents that are working more than one job. So it's hard for them to, you know, be at home with the kids in the first place. And I think we'll see that with the economic downfall of this. A lot of the parents aren't going to have jobs or are going to have to start working more than one job. So I don't know the level of engagement they'll be able to have with their child because they're trying to provide for their child. So I think it's a really big concern of mine as well, with women, with single parent households, with families that just come from, you know, a really struggling background in poverty. They are, you know, trying to make ends meet every day and they can't. And so what comes first, right? Your child's education or the job that you have to put money on or to put food on the table. So I think we are going to see that. And I'm not sure if it will be positive what happens from this.
Rhiannon, on that note, there's just one thing that I want to give kudos to PED in the state for before we hop off, that's related to this conversation. So given that we have so many kids that come from high poverty backgrounds, we know, and we saw all of our school districts do such a tremendous job of providing breakfast and lunch during school closure, but that still comes with barriers, right? If you don't have a parent that can drive you to school to pick up that breakfast and lunch, you can't access it. If you're home alone and you live far away from a school building, you can't access it. If you have someone in your household that's sick from COVID, you shouldn't be going out. It exposes our cafeteria workers to more transmission. So one of the things that we're so thrilled, and we worked with PED to get the application in and finalized, is New Mexico's rolling out their pandemic EBT program. This means that every family who has a student that's receiving free and reduced price lunch, if they already receive SNAP benefits, will see an additional amount of money on those benefits during school closure so that they can buy so they can buy food for their children. If a child is part of a family that isn't already receiving SNAP benefits, they will get a card in the mail in early June with money loaded on to buy food for their student. That helps with the transmission of COVID, reducing the transmission, because now they're not having to interact with other people. They're already buying groceries anyway. And it just lifts some of that economic burden off of our families in this really crazy time. So kudos to the education department for getting that off the ground. We're one of only 14
That's
states.
so awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for your advocacy on that. That's remarkable.
We were lucky that we heard about it early. So we were like, guys, this is out. The money is there. It doesn't cost anything. Get the application in. And the PED turned around that application and it was finalized last week.
That's so exciting.
Really great.
We're going a little over time, but I want to ask one final thing to each one of our panelists, and that's how can the community support your efforts and continue this productive dialogue around education in New Mexico? Is it talking to their legislators or people who are running for their legislative seat? As a plug, there's 112 seats on the ballot this year, so pay attention who's representing you. Or is it really getting into their schools and engaging more? Very open question, open-ended question. I'll start with Tammy.
I think it's to your second point. I think it's from parents. I think it's doing what they can to engage with their teachers, especially during this difficult time, because I think Jenna hit on it. Like, there's a lot of single families in this state, and if this goes longer than we anticipate, that's going to fall on a lot more on the parents. And I think having honest conversations, and to be honest, I don't think I've had enough conversations with my kids' teachers at this point to get independent evaluation. We've just been kind of like, okay, let's just try to do what we can. And I think whether it's a phone call, a video chat, and teachers and school administration being available for those parents, especially those parents that are really struggling to meet the educational needs for their kids, and if that moves into the fall, and making that available even in off times to adapt to those parents that are working out of the home or working more than one job, because I think it's going to be vital for their kids' success and for our success as a society to continue to educate our kids.
Jenna.
I'm gonna go off of what Tammy just said. We try, and I teach high school, so it's a little bit different. You know, we have 160 kids sometimes, but I think we do our best to try and reach out to parents. But I definitely think, like, I sent 2 emails to parents at the very beginning of COVID, letting them know how I was going to be communicating and sending them information of how they could join the Google Classroom. But since then, it's only been with students that I've been communicating, and I think the parents would probably appreciate another email. So you think about, like, even just talking to Tammy, who's not a parent of one of my students, has brought up, oh, I'm sure that there are some parents that are feeling X, Y, and Z. I think it's going to look a little bit different for every classroom, because calling 160 parents isn't something that I have the capacity to do right now. But I do think that each teacher on their own should be, like, reaching out to the parents and asking for more engagement as well, or reaching out to the students and asking, like, what is the situation at home? Like, should I call your mom, or would you prefer me to just go through you? Does she want an email? And those are things that we could do. But I definitely think the communication needs to be there between admin, parents, teachers, and students, because that's where the student is getting the support from. Those are their support systems. And if we're not having that engagement and communication consistently, a lot of things are going to fall between the lines, and that's where we're going to end up with some problems. So thank you for everything that you said about that, Tammy. And I think that's even something that I can work on in the next couple of weeks, is trying to be more focused on what do the parents need from me, and where are they feeling like their students are lacking, because I think that provides support both in the classroom and at home.
One thing that this literally happened so fast that we, especially as working parents, and I think a lot of parents can relate to that, so with both parents working out of the home, it's like we went to a situation where we sent our kids off to school, and yes, we're engaged parents. We work with our kids at home and homework and evening times. We went to that 100% falling on us. And it was, as well as still managing our own careers and trying to navigate that. And I think parents are still struggling with that in whatever level of engagement they can for their kids. It's still, I think we're still in that shock syndrome situation of, like, okay, how do we handle this, and how do we potentially handle this long term? We're in May now, and we're wrapping up our school year like this. What if this happens in the fall, and how do we adjust as a family to support them?
And that wasn't ever supposed to be your job, right? Like, you already are a parent full time, and you have your own job, and now you're expected to teach your students as well, or your children. So I think teachers on our end, we could work more with parents to say, like, how can we bridge the gap, especially if this goes into the fall, maybe emailing and calling at the very beginning of the year, like, here's the expectation. here's what it's going to look like. Let me train the parent as well. Let me send you our Google Classroom link so you can see how it works, so that you aren't having to learn it on top of your students learning it, right? I think you're bringing up some really fair points. So hopefully we can bridge that gap. I think Matt just wrote maybe a Zoom session with parents and teachers. That would be a great idea, like a virtual open house. And that way the parents could meet the teachers still, get to know them and understand their expectations, because right now it's just like, okay, we haven't been in school for 6 weeks, so I'm going to give you an assignment and your parents are probably going to have to teach you how to do it on their own. And that's not fair, but that's how it's turned out, I think, because it was such a fast transition. So I'm hoping that if we have more time in the summer, we'll be able to do more on our end to make it really well done, and the parents will be able to do more on their end as well to make it a smoother transition.
Before I go to Amanda for her opinion, I think what it was really neat that I just picked up off of this dialogue is that there's this teamwork element that I think is being reintroduced between parents and teachers, where there for years now I've heard that there was a kind of a friction between them, where it was more antagonistic, where parents might accuse teachers or not just be completely absent. So perhaps in this global pandemic, we found something that we had lost. So I'm really excited about that development.
Can I say one other thing about that really quick, Rhiannon?
Please.
I do think that there was that, we'd get an email from a parent who was like, I can't believe you did this to my student. And I was like, I didn't fail your student. They didn't do the work, right? But now I've actually had some like messages on Remind or through email or through my Google Classroom of parents like telling me, wow, I didn't realize how challenging this was. And I think a lot of teachers are getting that too. So that kind of helps us feel like, oh, what we did matters. And then I, on my end, am seeing like how much the parents are taking on, I'm not a parent, so I get to just work all day, but I have a cat and, do that. But these parents are working and raising their children and becoming teachers and counselors and nurses at home for their kids. And so I think it is a mutual respect. And I do think that is a positive that came out of this, is that we really want to work together more as we move forward, whether we're online or in person.
Definitely. We definitely value you way more now that we are not even in your shoes, but tiptoeing in them. Yes, definitely. Thank you for all you do.
Amanda.
Yeah, so New Mexico Kids Can exist to give more people voice, and we really truly believe that every citizen of New Mexico has voice when it comes to education. It's our future workforce. It's 45% of the state budget on just K-12. So we often hear people opt themselves out of the conversation. Oh, I'm not a teacher. Oh, I don't have kids in the system. And we're like, it still matters, and you still should get to use your voice as we move policies forward. So I say all of that to say our mission is to make it easy for people to engage in these conversations and get an overview of what's happening across the system. So I think the easiest way to support us in supporting our work and making the education system better is just by getting that information. So you can sign up for emails on our website, which is nmkidscan.org, or follow us on any social media. We're on them all at nmkidscan, except for TikTok, which I think I'm too old for. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And then, like reach out if you have questions, if you're seeing something that you're like, I don't know how to get through this. Or I really saw this thing that this district is doing and I'd like my district to adopt it. Do you have any ideas on how we could do that? Certainly we're happy to help in any way that we can. So send us a message on any of those platforms and we'll do our best to help you. And then it is okay to have expectations for your schools and your school districts as a parent and as a community member. So engage in those conversations through the summer. You may have to push on them to say, like, we want to know what the plan is. What's the plan if school is back to normal in August? What's the plan if it's not back to normal? Like, it's okay to expect that we have these large institutions planning over the summer. Depending on like the way contracts are written, teachers may not be working over the summer, but district staff works over the summer. So engage in those conversations with your districts and your school leaders, and hopefully we start the fall semester, regardless of whether kids are in the building or not, on a really strong foot with partnership between all of our community members.
And most teachers like are taking trainings in the summer. I'm going to like a week-long AP training that's now online, and a lot of teachers, our admin is pushing us to do like Google Forms and Google Slides and all of these trainings that they're consistently giving. So I do think maybe just like across the board, everybody's trying to do their best here. And if community partners could just, let's support parents and let's support teachers, because they didn't expect that this was going to be what their life looked like. And now they're trying to do their best, and let's support the PED because they're having to come up with solutions really, really quickly. And so just like continuing that conversation of, instead of blaming, like, I can't believe this isn't working out well, or I can't believe our kid is only getting one assignment a week. Well, maybe you support what they're doing first, and then we look at what ways could we continue to grow our education, continue to support teachers, continue to support the students that are struggling, instead of the blame game, which I think everybody is doing their best at right now.
Yeah, the massive support I've seen from lawmakers, policy folks, teachers, parents is astounding. Now, we turn that support into action items where we all hold each other accountable is where the trick and the magic is going to happen. And that's why these conversations, this panel was so important to me. I really appreciate all of your time, all of our attendees. Thank you. This has been a panel brought to you by Viante, New Mexico. As a recap, we look at education, crime, and quality of life in the state. We have these tough conversations where we try and find what is a common ground solution to these things that we all face. You may not have a child. You may not be somebody who's in the workforce right now, but these are things that have an impact, whether you have kids later on or if you're trying to hire. These are things that we all need to work together on to fix. So if you liked what you heard today, want to keep engaged with these webinars, we are doing them weekly. Just if you registered, we will email you back. And we'll be doing another one next week. Right now we're thinking it's going to be about the primaries. We're going to talk about the difference between that and the general election and why it's so important that you participate. If you're, let's say, a Democrat and you have your presumptive nominee for president, I've heard from some folks, they don't think they need to vote. There's so many down ballot issues that need your say. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Again, thank you, Amanda, Jenna, Tammy. This has been a wonderful discussion. We will post this on YouTube because I think a lot more people need to hear it.
You're awesome, Rhiannon. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you, Rhiannon.
All right, have a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend. Bye.
Bye.